If you've ever thought about being a digital nomad therapist, aka traveling the world while running a successful US-based private practice, but you're not quite sure what things to consider as you choose a country to travel to or relocate to that will allow you to enjoy that area but also be able to successfully run your business abroad. Well, after over a year and a half of living abroad while successfully running my practice from the United States, I have a couple of thoughts about things you should definitely consider when thinking about traveling or living in a place longer term outside of the United States. Hi, I'm Dr. Annie, and I am a licensed psychologist originally from the United States, but I am currently living and working from Morocco as a digital nomad therapist. I definitely know all the things that can go into building this type of lifestyle, transitioning your business from an in-person or hybrid practice from the United States into one that will allow you to be remote and traveling all over the world. So if you've ever thought about being a digital nomad therapist, or you're currently in the process of becoming one, definitely hit like and subscribe because I'll be sharing all my wisdom and tips and tricks and experiences that I've learned along my journey. If you're someone that's definitely looking for some more one-on-one support around making this transition, definitely check out the link below to my website, everbecoaching.com, and learn more about the coaching services I offer to therapists who aspire to travel while seeing the patients they love. Without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing you're going to want to probably consider, regardless of how much time you're going to be spending outside of the United States, is thinking about time zone differences. Obviously, you're going to be wanting to consider what the time zone is going to be for your patients compared to what the time zone will be for you in the new country and how those two line up. Something to really think about is how long you plan on traveling to a certain region of the world or a certain time zone area, because you kind of have two options. You have the option of changing your schedule to fit the new location you're in, or trying to keep your schedule the same for your patients and dealing with the time zone difference on your end. Now, I think depending on where you go will probably dictate how much flexibility you have, but I also think depending on how long you plan on living this type of lifestyle, there are a lot of things that you just want to consider, and definitely pros and cons to changing your schedule or keeping it the same and just kind of suffering through the time zone difference. I do have a video that talks through some more of these things that you might want to consider and tips on how to manage the time zone difference when you're living abroad. So definitely check that video out if you want to think through more of if you should change your time and how to best do it to keep client retention, because obviously there are going to be times that if you're changing your schedule often, or if you do have to change your schedule, you might lose some patients. That can be difficult over time, but in general, if you're starting out this new lifestyle and you're kind of open to different places to go, and you're worried about the time zone difference where you don't really want to have to change your patient's time, but you also don't want to be working through the middle of the night, which is totally understandable. I've done it. Pros and cons to it for sure. But if that's not something you're really wanting to do, I would definitely recommend checking out places like Mexico or South America. There are some really awesome countries that you can visit and work from that will allow you to live abroad and live in another culture, but also not have to really deal with some of the major time zone differences. Like in general, you're probably going to be a difference of 1 hour to 3 to 4 hours when it comes to South America and Mexico, depending on what coast your patients are and what coast you're going to be living on. But in general, that is much more manageable than if you start to cross the Atlantic or the Pacific, because those time zone differences are a lot more strenuous and are going to require some adjustment. The second thing that I think is really important to consider is the country's infrastructure. And within that, I think three major points are the Wi-Fi, the general lifestyle and medical care. Now, when it comes to Wi-Fi, that obviously is very important for you as a digital nomad therapist. If you want to be able to keep your patients and not have them be frustrated and leave because you have terrible Wi-Fi connection and you're not able to do the work of a therapist, you definitely want to make sure you're traveling to countries or even honestly regions within those countries that offer really stable, strong Wi-Fi connections. Now, why I say regions is because probably most countries nowadays have reliable internet, especially in more metropolitan areas like the bigger cities. But if you're someone who wants to live in maybe more rural areas, like a countryside, then that's when you really are probably going to need to live in a country that has a better Wi-Fi infrastructure. Like currently I'm here in Morocco and the major cities have good Wi-Fi, but I think the further you go out, the more tricky your Wi-Fi situation is going to be. And I could imagine there are other countries that are like that. But then obviously there's countries like Thailand where you go to an island and you're gonna have exceptional internet just because their Wi-Fi infrastructure is honestly probably better than the United States. So definitely do your research and make sure wherever you're going is going to have Wi-Fi options for you. If you're anything like I was when I was first starting, I was definitely very anxious about what the Wi-Fi might be like in other countries. I had done some traveling, but I had never obviously tried to work from those countries. And so I was definitely anxious about it. But check out my Wi-Fi video where I kind of talk through ways that you can set yourself up for success when it comes to Wi-Fi. The second thing under infrastructure is lifestyle and culture. Now, if you're someone who just wants to do this kind of shorter term, then this might not be as important for you. But if you're wanting to live somewhere longer term, 3, maybe even 2 months plus, then you definitely want to consider what are important daily life or regular lifestyle things that are really important to you. Obviously, the beauty about traveling to other countries is that you're getting immersed in other cultures, but there are some things that you might have that are really important to you, and if you want to have this lifestyle be sustainable and something that you can have longer term, you want to make sure there are those basic lifestyle necessities that you have in that place you're going to go. And so definitely just really consider what's important to you and making sure those types of things are available in the country or region that you're going to. And then lastly, for infrastructure is medical care. Now, this is something I feel really passionate about because when I first started out being a nomad, I was quite worried about transitioning into just relying on the medical care of the places that I was traveling to. Like I was trying to think about like, oh, well, should I fly back to the United States anytime I need, to go see a doctor or need prescriptions, which I definitely had put on some Facebook forum asking that question. And someone was like, I think you just need to transition into being an immigrant. Which was just like a really helpful comment because I was like, oh yeah, I'm immigrating and that's a part of the process. And I think I was a little bit scared to test it out. But in general, what I found is the medical care outside of the United States is just as good, if not better. I will say that with any new country that you're traveling to, they're going to have different regulations. They're going to have different access to medical care. Like here in Morocco, I would say there's great options for medical care here. It might be even easier to access medical care here than in the United States. Like doctors don't have significant wait times, but there are some medical things that I would prefer probably to go to another country to receive than here. And so similarly to you, for you is to really consider, are there certain medical conditions that you have that require you to have a higher level of care, or you need care more often, or there's certain prescriptions that you need, and just making sure that that country has the infrastructure for that. Like for example, if you have ADHD and you rely on ADHD medications, there are going to be some countries that ban ADHD medications. Like here in Morocco, that's not something you can access. Definitely do your research around that, because either you talk to your doctor in the United States and they give you a year-long supply, which is something that they can do, or you need to maybe just stick closer to home where you can maybe fly home for more medical procedures, even though hopefully you don't have to do that. But hopefully you're able to find a country that offers you pretty good medical care, if not better than the United States. Like places like Europe, South Korea, or Thailand, they have exceptional medical care there, and there's a lot of travel tourism to those places because of their renowned medical care. So definitely don't let that keep you from living this lifestyle longer term, because there are going to be options for you, but it's just something that you need to think about. Okay, the second thing is distance from home. Now, if you're someone who has family that you don't want to be away from for long periods of time, or for whatever reason you need to travel back to the United States fairly often, I would say probably more than twice a year, then I would definitely consider countries that are closer to home. Because I think that when you start really adjusting to different time zones often, it can just really be hard on your body, and it can be hard on your bank account because once you start doing multiple long haul flights, it's just going to be pricey unless you're able to somehow hack the point system, which I honestly have never been able to figure out. But it just can get pricey and it can just be really hard on your body. And so if you are someone that you know you're going to want to be home often, definitely consider places like Costa Rica, Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Colombia. All those places are going to be great, and it's not going to be as hard on your body if you need to travel home more often. But obviously, if you want to explore further away from home, just be aware there will be probably some consequences of just making such big time zone and long haul travel changes. Okay, the fourth thing that you want to consider is cost of living. Now, obviously in the United States, cost of living is ridiculous. And I know there's a lot of people that think about moving outside of the United States because the quality of life will probably be better than in the United States, which I think generally is true. But I would say that that isn't always the case. So you definitely want to consider how much you can reasonably afford. Like, sit down and come up with a reasonable budget that you think, even on lower months like November, December, or summer months where your sessions might be lower, people might be on vacation, or people might drop off just because of the natural time of the year. Definitely base your budget off of those months and consider like what is going to be reasonable for you, and then think about the countries that will give you a good quality of life without obviously breaking the bank. And the biggest thing I would say for this is going to be accommodation. Being a digital nomad therapist, you have a little bit more stricter necessities when it comes to your accommodation, especially if you plan on holding or conducting your sessions in that accommodation, which is probably going to be the best option for you. Because obviously there's co-working spaces that have private rooms, but those private rooms might not be insulated enough, or they might just not work out. You always want to make sure that you can use your accommodation for your sessions. And so your accommodation is probably going to be pricier than those backpackers that can easily stay in a dorm room in a hostel. You're going to probably need a private room, if not your own separate Airbnb. And that obviously is just a little bit pricier, if not a lot of bit pricier, especially if you're staying in more touristy areas. So definitely do some research on Airbnb and consider what the prices are of those private Airbnbs or private rooms within a hostel, because that's going to be your biggest expense and probably will dictate where you can go. Like, if you want to go to Switzerland, your cost of living is just going to be so much higher. Definitely consider that, because it would be terrible to end up in a country and then not really be able to afford it, or feel like you're still in that same rat race that you were in the United States. Okay, lastly are the visas. Now, if you've done any sort of international travel and you are a holder of a United States passport, you probably know that it's pretty easy to get entry into most countries without a laborious visa process. That is, by and large, very true. Most countries are happy to welcome you in for a period of stay into their country. The things you want to consider are the length of the visa stay, because most visa stays probably allow you So around 30 days, that's probably going to be the average. And so if you're someone who wants to stay in that country for longer than 30 days, you definitely need to start doing some research on the visa options that you have. Now, most times for Americans, we're granted visa on arrivals, which is that like typical 30-day stay. But they do offer some lengthier tourist visa options, but those are ones that you're going to have to apply for. Oftentimes you can apply online and it's not too much of a hassle, but definitely look into it. And if you're someone who's considering relocating to another country, you definitely want to look into what kind of longer term visa options you have or what it takes to become a resident in that country. Places like Portugal, Croatia, Spain, they have some really awesome visas that you can get as a digital nomad. I think even in Portugal, it's fairly much easier to get a residency there than maybe some of the other countries. And so if that's something you're wanting, definitely look into that, because oftentimes they require to show that you're financially independent. And since you're self-employed, you might have to go through some more hoops. You might also consider getting in touch with a visa lawyer to understand your options. And then they might also require you to show a proof of money to sustain yourself. Like I think I was looking into the digital nomad visa in Thailand, and I think they require like a balance of 15,000 US dollars in your bank account to be considered. I could be wrong. I mean, obviously I think visa requirements are can be a little bit tricky to navigate, and so that's why maybe consulting with a lawyer can be helpful. But those are things that you just want to consider, because if you are thinking about living in a place longer term, you might want to start planning that now, like creating a savings account and starting to make sure you have that money, or getting in touch with a lawyer to help through the process. But visas are definitely something you want to consider, especially the longer you're wanting to stay in a country. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope these were helpful for you. If there's other things that you're trying to consider or other things you're trying to think through, definitely leave a comment below. I would love to know what you're trying to think through, just so I can learn, but also if I can share any of my wisdom. Yeah, leave a comment below, and I hope to see you in the next one. Okay, bye.